Hey everybody, I'm Yvonne Williams with Back to Earth Creations, and in this video I want to show y'all how to use one of our templates. These are available for sale on my Etsy, and they're also made available to all of my $10 and up patrons for digital download, so you can download it and print it off as many times as you want, use it in whatever. I hope that if people are like, oh wow, how'd you do this, you just kind of hail them back over this way so that I can teach them, or if you want to teach them, just kind of spread the learning and all that good stuff. So what we have going on here today, I'm going to change the camera so y'all can see. Here you can see this is how the template prints off, and whenever you print it off, you're going to want this little 1-inch square to be roughly 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters. I hand drew it like kind of with a ruler, so it's an inch-ish. So I mean, if you're a couple millimeters off, it's not going to be the end of the world, but you want to be careful to not just do fit to screen or fit to page. You want to have it actual size whenever you print it. And something that we can do is you could trace this onto something like, oh, I don't have any directly on hand, but some tracing film or some freezer paper. That way it doesn't have like a papery back. So let's actually grab some of that and do that. So here I have just some regular freezer paper, like Reynolds brand. It has a papery side and a waxy side. And this is perfect for transferring templates because whenever you're working with leather, to transfer the design, we'll be spraying it with water, which I'm actually going to go ahead and do now. That way, and just to show you guys, this is some second use leather, so I've sprayed it and you can see how it's kind of soaking it in quite thirstily. So I'm just going to, and this is called casing. Now to me this is just spritzing it down, because to case it, what I would do is I would hold it down under the water, like submerge it until these little bubbles will come up and out of it. But that isn't necessary for just transferring a design. So I've just spritzed it on, rubbing it around with my hand a little bit. This leather that I'm using here is quite thick. It's about 3 or 4, like closer to 4 millimeters. But you could use something thinner. But I wanted something that would be kind of stiff, because you can see on this design there's these little horn parts. I don't want that flopping around and being floppy on us, and I also wanted something that would take a really nice deep tooling. So I'm going to do just a little bit more moisture and set that off to the side. Now I'm going to set our template down and layer over it with the freezer paper, which also makes a pretty decent tracing film. Is it wide enough this way? Not quite. Okay. Trying to be cost effective. It might be down on this end though. Yes. Okay. Because you could get quite a few different templates out of this one piece. Oh, my kingdom for a pen. Randy has come to save me. Thank you, Randy. You know, because I'm a professional and prepared and whatnot. So what we're going to be doing here then is, you can see where the lines are. We're just going to trace over it. You could use a pen or pencil or whatever you like. And I get kind of sloppy on this, but that's okay, because you can let it just translate into whatever you're doing. So just bringing that around. You can also, on parts of the template, if you don't like how close that is, go ahead and bring that line down a little bit. Please feel free to make as many modifications as you feel are appropriate to the templates. You know, make it your own. There's no real right or wrong way to go about doing this if it gets you the end result that you like. I do recommend, like, you have these lines line up, you know, the kind of where the knotwork is happening. You know, because I don't want this line finishing over here and this one starting over here, if that makes sense. You want it to look cohesive and like it's actually interwoven. Because art is, it's a little bit of an illusion. You want to give the illusion of the ribbons of the knotwork actually being interwoven. So you can see here, this one's kind of deviating a little bit. see how that's not quite lined up, and so just go in and fix it just like that. So now that we've drawn it, we can remove the original template, and from here I'm going to make a few modifications. So I'm actually going to extend the design up a little bit because I want this to be a kind of statement piece. I want it to be a little bit larger. And so I'm extending the horns up and through. There we go. I'm just adding a little bit of a border. And you could do this however you like. You could add all different kinds of shapes and patterns and stuff to it. I wanted to provide the templates mostly for some bones to give you some base structure. And you could use all different kinds of design tools to help you keep your lines nice and even, but I kind of enjoy getting to freehand it. Lets the creativity come out. Sorry, Ember's quite distraught, it seems, that she doesn't get enough attention. So here we have this. And just to refine the lines a little bit more, I'm going to do a little bit more shaping. And then from here, I'm just going to cut. And I get quite a few uses out of these freezer paper templates. You can see it's just about all soaked in, starting to return back to its regular color. And you could use the tip of your pen, or like I recommend ballpoint pens for this if you're going to be doing that. Or you could just use, this is a ballpoint stylus. I want to make sure all the different pieces and parts are actually staying on with no weird overlap or anything like that. Yeah, everything looks good. And I'm just kind of pressing through the paper, not to the point of actually puncturing through it, but definitely trying to transfer the design. There we go. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Some artists are much, much more meticulous than I am. I am not a meticulous or accurate artisan. Not even kind of, or sometimes. That's okay. That's how I enjoy it. And the point of doing this is to enjoy it. Well, the point of it, I guess, is whatever you want it to be. But for me, the point of it is to have fun and to enjoy what I'm doing. So you can see we've gotten to about the halfway point, and that's how it's transferring through. You're going to be really careful to not let it slip. There we go. And you could draw in your own knotwork, all different kinds of stuff, y'all. Come through, doing. And actually, this, I don't know how, but it got like a little burr on it, so I actually need to polish the tip of it down, because sometimes it snags and cuts and drags through the paper. And I really like doing this because I can feel over here that I have textured over it, whereas over here it's all smooth. So usually the first time using a template, I'll use this ballpoint. The second time using a template, I'll use a blue pen. Third time red pen. Fourth time black pen. And usually by that point, it will be really super thin on where the lines are. So you can move that aside. You can see that's kind of how it transferred over. And you can see whenever there's a little corner over here that the corners weren't cased, and you can see the difference between how it will take your texturing. And you can go through and at this point clean up any lines, like right here. super messy. So I can just go over that and trace it, reestablish that line to give ourselves, you know, something nice and crisp and good to follow. Tracing that around, darkening in the side here. Now from this point, we could have two options. You could cut out the edges, or you could tool it. Like, to do the cutting and start doing the tooling. If this were a thinner piece of leather, I would leave it intact and start doing the tooling, because sometimes that can give you a little bit of spread on the piece and can distort the way that the pattern lays. I mean, sometimes it's minimal, sometimes it's a lot. But I'm going to go ahead on this one and just cut out the outer edge. And to do that, you could use, here we have some heavy leather shears. And then here we have, oops, sorry, two different kinds of box knives. I really like this one because it's got a nice secure handle that lets me store other razor blades in it. But you can also use, these are super accessible, like Walmart, like everywhere I've ever seen carries this kind of box knife. And they're super affordable too. So just whatever you have will work. And so for cutting, you do want to make sure you have a nice sharp blade in. And I'm just going to line this up. Let me see if I can't get a slightly different camera angle for you guys. How's that sit for you? And I'm just going to line it up. And then kind of firmly but carefully come across. And you do want to be doing this on a cutting mat. Keep your fingers out of the way. Don't do this number. That's so bad. This is, I mean, seriously thick cowhide. If this cuts through this leather so easily, you can imagine what it's going to do to your, you know, delicate hand flesh. So just nice and careful. Cut it through. One more for good measure. You can see, just like that. And now, just to show an alternative, you can come in with your scissors. Now also be just as careful. You don't want to have your fingers overlapped like on the back side of something and be cutting in. And it seems obvious, but whenever you get really absorbed into a project, kind of obvious things can tend to go out the window. So I actually feel like I have a little less control with the big shears, but it still gets you a really nice cut. Still gets the job done. So it's just how, you know, different ways of going about it. This is large enough that I'm going to save it as scrap, because I can definitely test out dyes or 3D stamps or new textures, or just saving it for experimentation. Whereas ones like this one, it's kind of oddly shaped, so I go ahead and the hoarder in me saves it. So, because I'm like, oh, well, I could cut little leaves out of it, or there's all different kinds of stuff that you can do with your scrap leather. So use your discretion and decide for yourself what you want to keep and what you want to throw away. Just slicing through. Oops. So you can see on that one, I totally messed up. Shaved off more than I intended to. So what we'll do there is I can just bring this line a little further in and make it look like it was that way the whole time. And this is another one of the reasons why I don't mind cutting out the main outline first, because that way it just gives you room to recover. Whereas if I had already done all the cutting and tooling, then that line would have been set kind of where it was. Okay, so for here, changing the camera angle again, zooming in just a bit for you guys. Just kind of placing and cutting. go. I always try to be nice and careful around curves because it's just another opportunity place to really mess up. And so here we could actually come through with our shears. Just make sure everything's nice and clean. And trying really hard, you don't want to cut past that line. Another idea that you could do is you could use a large hole punch to kind of notch out this area that's really hard to get into with the box knife, and just punch a hole and then cut from the edges of the hole. I think I'll demonstrate that on the other side. So to do that, where it is, you're going to want to use a punching mat or cutting board. And I'm just grabbing, this is the biggest one I have on hand. It's 3/8 of an inch, craft tool number 14. And I'll try my best to have links to all the tools and materials down in the video description below. So I've got to move my kind of off to the side a little bit so that I don't bump, bless you, my tripod arm. Moving that over. I'm going to place that right there. We don't want to go too far in over our line. I'm just going to set that there and then get a good nice punch. Set that back off to the side. And now we can come back in. Bless you. You're fine. It's that time of year. I mean, how dare you have allergies? Right? So we come through and you can see that makes it so much easier to just come in and then cut out away from that point. And I don't usually cut on that, but there we go. So you can see the kind of difference. That one's a little bit messier. I feel like that one's much cleaner. They also have some end punches for like belts and stuff. Like, I mean, anything that you can use that makes you feel confident about being able to do a nice clean cut, do it. There's no point in making the job more difficult for ourselves than it has to be. There we go. And I'm just going to slide our knife in here and just slice it out that way. So there we are. We have cut it out. Now the next step is we are going to use an edge beveler. You can kind of see the shape of the tip here. And there are a couple of different styles of these to use, but I like this one, especially on thicker leathers. And then we can just come through and you can see this is a beveled edge. See how that shaping on that is a little nicer? And then this edge has not been beveled, so it's kind of like a sharp corner. And so I'm just going to come through and bevel my edges on all sides, front and back. And I really like doing this because it helps clean up some of, if I did like a messier cut than what I wanted. There we go. It kind of erases those lines. It makes, even where you do a hole punch, it makes that bevel a little bit smoother. You know, that transition rather. There we go. And sometimes you can cut a little too deep, but just do your best. The more you do it, the better you'll get. The more of an idea you'll have of what to do and what not to do. And I do like to bevel down the back as well, just because. Let me see if I can't find my other beveler, because I really want to show the difference just in what different tools can do. So this is my other edge beveler, and it's just a different style of tip. Here you can see the difference. I really prefer this larger one for whenever I'm doing like my corsets on very thick leather and I have a lot of long, like straight or slightly curved edges or lines. And I like this one for getting into kind of tighter places. So. And so there you can really see it gives it just a nice, clean, sliced off edge. Got one more side. Oops. Yeah, that's something you want to be careful of, is to not stab yourself and to not mar up your piece. I don't mind it as much when it happens on the back side, but sometimes if that happens on the front and it just gives you like a big gash. There we go. There we go. And so now from here, the next step that we're going to do is I'm going to use a swivel knife, which is this tool here. Take the cap off of it. And I like a nice flat, blunt, broad blade for doing nice, thick, heavy lines like this. And something that we can do with our wing beveler tool is I'm actually going to take this and size it down to roughly about what I would like my edge border to be, which is going to be about 1 centimeter, or this looks like 3/8 of an inch. And I'm just going to line this up. I'm going to come in a little bit tighter and just line it up with the edge of your leather and then come down. And you can see that gives you a very even, let me zoom in some, very even edge. Nice and consistent. There we go. Just placing and dragging along. It's okay if you hit some hiccups with it, but that's the straighter and more even you cut your edges out, the cleaner and more even this line will be. There we go. And so now from here we can take our blade and I'm just going to slice, and you can see I went ahead and cleaned up that wiggly part, getting a really nice deep, with the swivel knife whenever you place it, most of the weight is going through my first finger, and then I use these 2 fingers to slide it, and then I pull it along with almost my entire arm. So placed, stabilizing through the top, holding, and then just slicing around, just like that. So I'm going to do the other lines. And I really prefer to work towards myself. I think this is just a personal preference on my part, but it does make me feel like I have a little bit more control over where the blade's going, as opposed to pushing away from myself. There we go. And last line, at least for the edging. So there we are. And then from here, I'm going to do the cuts for the knot work. Just kind of slicing and letting them happen. And this is another thing that I really love saving these scrap pieces for, is that if you don't feel very confident in your swivel knife skills, like your ability to control where it's going, practice for a bit. I mean, if it's something that you were going to potentially just throw away anyways, there's no reason to not get a little bit of practice in under your belt and build your confidence, build your hand coordination. And it's really, it does take some different muscles that you might not be used to using. Now also you can see here, whenever the lines get to a point where they look like they're intersecting, I don't necessarily cut into right there. Let me zoom in a bit for you, because demonstration's purpose. Here's lines for a Celtic knot, and then here's lines coming directly out of it. This gives us little corners that over time, well, not even on camera, over time these little corners can you know, like fray, and it's like, I don't know, they're more detached. Whereas I kind of just go like that because I'm going to be going through and beveling this. So this part here is going to be compacted down, and it's just, I don't know, it gives us, I'll just demonstrate. Seems to be the way to go. So let me grab my beveling tool. And I'm going to demonstrate with a smooth and a textured beveler. So here we have a nice little, like a marble or granite or, you know, some kind of block. So I'm going to do the same thing on this side where it's cut all the way up to the line, and then on this side where it's not quite cut to the line. Casing it just a little bit. Letting that soak in. Oh, I hate waiting for leather to dry. Like, I'm so impatient. But you have to let it happen. So this is a complete and total rush job. Let it dry naturally, y'all. So I'm going to come through with my textured beveler foot on this side. And I'm going to try to not hit the camera tripod. But you can bring it up to the line, just like that. And just kind of walk it along. And so you can see here the difference. This one I feel like disappears more behind the line, whereas this one you can still see there's a little bit of a line there. So use your own personal preference. And then also with a smoothed beveler foot, I'm going to take it and place it just like that. And so again here, you can still see the lines there on that one, whereas on that one they kind of fade away. And those are also two very different examples of how the same tool can have different effects with between the textured and the smooth. So it's all personal preference really when it comes down to it. I'd had some pieces that like I do like undercuts and things on, and so the little edges on these ones over the years had started to come up, and that's why I started doing it this way. But experiment with it on your own and decide what works best for you. So if any of y'all leather workers out there too have any insight on which way over the other, or does it really matter at all, I'd love to hear your perspective. Okay, so move that aside. And so now we just come back to finishing up our cuts. And it's a lot of fun. It really is. It can be quite time consuming initially, but again, the more you do it, the faster you'll get at it. It's not necessarily a race, but it does feel good to do a project in a timely manner. And I also just kind of love that slicing, cutting leather noise. There we go. And so we've cut out our lines. And now from here, I'm going to demonstrate just a little bit of the texturing. I am going to use a textured bevel foot, as well as, and I really love this texture background if I can find it. Where'd you go, texture, that I like so much? So I'm going to be using this textured beveler foot and then this backgrounding tool, which to show you guys, you can already see what the texture foot does, like the textured beveler. But then what we're going to be doing with the backgrounder is coming through and just placing it a little, not full flat, but a little bit at an angle. And then whacking it. Just like that. So, and it can seem redundant to have done all of that work with the beveler foot. And let's see what the difference looks if we use the non-textured beveler foot. That way, if you only have one or the other, you can kind of choose and determine for yourself what you prefer. You know, honestly, that looks pretty cool. But if we go through, and I overlapped a little too much on this one, that's what I get for looking through the camera instead of at my project. You can blend that out a little bit though with the flat end of the tool. Just kind of smooth it out. It burnishes it a bit, but meh, it'll be alright. But if you don't do the beveler first, this can be how it comes out. Even turned at an angle. So while you still get that nice shading effect, there's none of that three-dimensional. That beveler foot makes such a difference in giving it a very nice, not just tactile third dimension, but that depth. So that's why I always go through with the beveler first. So again though, personal preference. You know, do what it takes to get the results that you're looking for. So now I'm going to case this really well. And you can case things really well with a squirt bottle. It just kind of takes longer because you spray a layer and you let it soak in. And then you flip it over and you spray a layer and you let it soak in. And I still feel like it doesn't penetrate into the inside quite as much. But it'll do. Again, do what you feel like it takes to get the results that you're looking for. And so I'm going to go for a minute and then let this soak in, and I'll meet y'all right back here. So here you can see the leather has been thoroughly cased. There was, I don't know what that is on the back. Like I think I might have gotten some acrylic Resolene splattered on the back of this. That's why it's the backside. It's started to return to its natural color. It has a lot more, it's much more supple now. It has a little bit of stretch to it. And so this is getting to where we can shape it and stuff too. But I'm going to take y'all into a time lapse and try to get a couple of different angles of it happening. And so we're going to go into hopefully a pleasant musical number and some super fast speed. So I'll see y'all in a minute. Okay, y'all, so we're back here and I have finished the tooling. Again, you could use whatever kind of tools that you want. You could have used the backgrounder to go over these little interwoven areas. This is just how I felt like doing it. And then I also want to show you guys how to use a gel antique. This one's a little bit different than the other ones, but the concept is the same. This one is their black color, and it's much runnier. than like their tan or their saddle tan or their mahogany. This is the Tandy Leather Factory brand EcoFlow Gel Antique. And the way that I like to do this to kind of, you know, the idea is you want to apply it quite generously, but I don't want to waste any, you know, by getting it like stuck up in the sponge or, you know, leaving brush strokes or anything like that. This is not something that you would airbrush on. Definitely not. Get it nice and shook up. We have some paper towels over here. I'm using my box knife to hold my, oh, what is this? Freezer paper down. And I have it waxy side up. But I'm just going to take the cap off. And normally I would glob some out into my glove, but you can see this is really runny. So I'm just going to run some out into my hand and then start rubbing it in. Now, this is not something that I would recommend if you want a solid, like, deep midnight black all over. But I wanted to show you guys the kind of different effects and things that you can get when you're working with this kind of EcoFlow antique gel. The nice thing about it being kind of runny is it's really easy to apply. You know, it's super easy to get it down into all the nooks and crannies, onto all the different faces. Because you do want to be able to go through, like here on the edges. Go ahead and get that darkened in right from the get-go before we start wiping some off. Well, you have plenty of extra on your hand, but this is one of them that gets soaked up into a sponge really easily too, though. And this stuff doesn't stain your hands too badly, but whenever you're doing it like this, it makes sense to use gloves. Okay, so now I'm going to take a paper towel. I'm wiping the excess off of my gloves, that way I don't leave fresh, wet fingerprints. So that's the only wasted bit off of the gloves. And I'm going to fold this up into a little pad and a couple spritz from a water bottle. And I'm going to begin buffing off the excess of this black antique gel. I mean, you can see how much that took off of there. And I really feel like these antique gels do a fantastic job of pulling out all the detailing, you know, of the tooling and texturing that we did. I'm going to go ahead and buff up the back, because even though there's no tooling on the back side, this is designed as like a headpiece, and I don't want someone to, you know, wear it and have like a sweaty black mark on the back of their head. So let's go ahead and buff the excess off the back, rub it into the sides, you know, the edges. And if there's any, like, it's not quite as dark there as I wanted it to be, so I'm just getting a fingertip with some of the dye on it, coming through and just darkening that in and wipe off the excess. And I feel like this really does a fair job for sure, bringing out all of those details. But you can see it still looks like kind of dark brown. Like, it certainly does not look like you just stained it completely black. And one of my favorite things to do from here is to go through, let it dry, and then stain over it with an alcohol-based dye or another water-based, because it's going to have a little bit of a waxy residue on the surface that will repel a little bit, so you won't get as intense of a color. But you can kind of block over it with, I mean, all sorts of different stuff. Like, you could do acrylic resin mixed with some Pearl X pigments to give it a very metallic sheen. You could dry brush it with some of the more flexible acrylic paints, because again, this on something like straps or something, I would never recommend using acrylic paints, but on something like this that, honest to goodness, unless it's getting abused, is never going to bend more than this, acrylic paints would work beautifully on it. And so you could really bring out the knotwork and all sorts of stuff. So I actually think I'm going to let this dry. So I'll meet y'all right back here. Probably, I don't know how long it'll be. Also, I wanted to let you guys know, due to the magic of editing, I was able to shave down however long that segment ends up being. That was originally like 15 minutes of tooling and everything. So I was going to try to get it shaved down to about a minute or two. But this is me talking like present me. Future Vaughn might have a completely different idea about how she's going to edit it. So we'll see what happens. Well, you'll see, I guess. So yeah, we're going to let this dry. I anticipate like 10 minutes. It'll be fine. I just don't want to keep lifting out any of that antique gel. I want it to penetrate and settle and be very happy. So I'm going to show you guys a little bit more of how it looks wet. And then I'll meet y'all right back here when it's nice and dry. Okay, so here you can see it's quite almost dull. After drying out, it hasn't been buffed yet. Like, just to give an idea of how it'll look after even just a gentle buffing, this is it before. And this is it after. So you can see the difference in the shine. Duller, shinier. But I don't want to do that too much until we get some paint on here. So I'm gonna grab a round brush. Oh, where's the one I just had? Where'd you go, brush? You were my friend. Okay, here we are. And we have some folk art enamel in silver sterling. Color looks like 4034. And this stuff works out pretty well. Again, I wouldn't color your straps and stuff with it, like anything that's going to have a lot of flexibility and movement going on. And like even on this one, I wouldn't necessarily paint, you know, not real thick at least. And I'm just coming through and kind of, I mean, not quite dry brushing, but I'm not being real particular about the coverage. And then you can just take your finger and kind of slide it. So I do want to make sure that I'm not just getting silver everywhere, but I'm not trying to get it down into all the little nooks and crannies. Just like that. And so we can just get some from the cap. Do a couple of layers. It's important to let your layers dry in between application. That way you don't start pulling up your previous layer and getting like splotchy spots. Now also, if you want something that's going to be quite very durable, I would recommend acrylic Resolene with Pearl-Ex pigments mixed in. That penetrates really well, but it gives you a much more limited spectrum of colors to work with. Now also, like Kova Colors and Angie's acrylic, like acrylic paint for leather, is a very, you know, flexible kind. But I wanted to demonstrate that you can use stuff that you can just get at Walmart or get at, you know, your local Hobby Lobby or Michael's or craft store. You know, you don't necessarily have to use these specialty items to get cool effects. And I think part of the trick too is to kind of figure out ways of making less expensive or more accessible or maybe not necessarily ideal materials, figuring out how to get them to work for you. You know, how to take something that's not ideal and make it more so. Because sometimes you buy the wrong paint, or sometimes, you know, you just have a bunch left over that needs used up, or, you know, you never know. Things aren't always perfectly ideal. And I think a lot of being a professional artist or artisan is just figuring out how to make do as well. And I'm gonna do a little bit, of the silver highlighting here on the knotwork. And then I think I'm gonna go around the edging as well. And I haven't watered this down. You could, but I wanted a nice thick pigment. You could water it down quite a bit and build up layers if you prefer. I used to do that almost exclusively because, in theory, it does penetrate the leather better, just going in with the water, but it's so time consuming, and I've found out that it's like just going over this with a generous coat of acrylic resin will hold it on, and it holds up really well. So trying to balance work input with quality output. Now, I don't think I would use spray paint on leather. I've never experimented with that, but it just seems it doesn't seem like something that's like, oh yeah, that would work perfect for this. I don't really know how it would bind or how it would hold up over time, or even how it would affect the leather. Okay, and so here you can still see some brush strokes and stuff, but I'm pretty pleased with that. Gonna touch it up a little bit more here. And now for our edges, we get to be a lot messier because we just have one edge to worry about extending past. So just getting these edges down, blocking in that color. And again, you could mix up your own colors. You could do varieties of different colors going on. You could just dry brush the whole thing because all of these lower down details would not pick up on the dry brushing, if that makes sense. Like the dry brushing just catches the highlights, like the high points. But I really wanted to show the contrast going on here. And I'm just coming around and filling it in. And if any gets where you don't want it to be, I just kind of get in with my fingernail even and just scrape it on out. So coming over all this. And then also, you can choose to have your armor be bright and shiny, or your headpiece. And these same techniques, if I wanted to do this as like a pauldron or a bracer or, anything like that, these same techniques would overlap into, tooling's tooling, whether you're doing it on a wallet or on a shield or on a headdress or, like, the techniques remain the same regardless of the application, or rather the concepts behind them, because there are always different ways of going about it. Okay, so there we have that. It's pretty good looking, I think. And so now I'm going to let this dry. I'm going to wash out my brush because I don't want this acrylic paint to get stuck in the bristles and gunk it up forever. There we go. And now we can take a stiff bristled chip brush. Let me see if I can pull one out. Something just like this. You know, this one's just a 1-inch chip brush. And we can tap test. And make sure this over here needs to dry just a little bit more. But what we can do is take just some acrylic paint, like black acrylic paint. Here we have all-purpose Anita's acrylic, I mean super affordable black acrylic paint. And I'm going to use the same template we were using earlier, not template, backdrop. And I'm just going to drop a glob, just a little glob. Getting a little bit onto the bristles. And then tapping it out, you can see, I mean, how much that carries until it starts doing very minimal amounts. Then I'm going to start with our drier side. And I'm just kind of roughly brushing over it, picking up a little bit more of that pigment. A little bit more again. And you can see this is just kind of catching the edges. So you can see now the difference between weathered and unweathered. It's very subtle, but it's there. And so you get to kind of choose your own finish, you know. And I used way too much. Even just that little bit was way, way too much. And you can see from the side, I'm hitting it and going across and just kind of being consistent about the direction that I'm approaching it at. Okay. And that uses such a little bit of paint that it dries so quickly. We can actually, I have a little bit of dampness here. And I'm just kind of cleaning up a little bit more. If you want to take off some of that weathering that we had just done, this is the perfect time to do it. There we go. Now you can see also while the paint's still a little bit damp and flexible, we can do the shaping on our headdress. You can see no cracking or anything. Now the next step here is going to be to slick the edges and put a finish on it. So what we're going to be doing for that, I'm grabbing a couple of different tools. We have our jar of Fibings Aussie leather conditioner, Aussie wax, as a lot of folks call it, a horsehair bristle brush, nice and clean. Words are super mega hard. And where on earth is my edge slicker? There it is. And an edge slicker. I want to start with the back side because it's nice and dry. So I'm just going to open up our Aussie wax, get a bit on my hand, and start rubbing it in. This stuff, it's great for leather. It's also great for your hands. Keeps all my calluses nice and soft. So you could wear gloves for this, but I mean, it's really greasy, but it actually penetrates really well. So just whatever. And I'm going ahead and letting a lot get on the edges too, because this is going to condition and protect your leather. So this oily, waxy barrier that we're building up on the backside here, this is what's going to be protecting your leather from the sweat of wearing it, from any dirt or grime, you know, that might build up. If you have like face paint on, you'll still be able to wear this, and depending on the type of face paint, it shouldn't stain your leather, you know, and also hopefully protecting the leather, you know, your head from the leather. You don't want the stain to be coming off. So we have that, and I'm just going to take this brush and I'm kind of just working it into the leather. And it's going to be quite dull to start with. But this kind of acts to burnish it. Ideally, I go over it with this, and then I go over it with a piece of denim. But I don't have any denim directly on hand. Looking around, I don't see any. But that just acts to close the pores of the leather, which helps penetrate it more. Hey, Sam Dog, what's up? You miss Daddy? Yeah, you miss Daddy. And so there you can see, it's buffed in nicely, and we can take a clean section of paper towel. Now this deteriorates much more rapidly than what the blue jean would, but it serves the same purpose. You can see it's still wicking off some stain. But we can do a couple of layers of this, and then we can coat it with the acrylic Resin. Just whatever you prefer. So now for that front side, I'm just going to get little bits on my finger and kind of rub it in, because I don't want it to get globbed up into the little nooks and crannies and crevices from our tooling. And so I'm just buffing and rubbing, and you can see that really shined it up nicely. And this layers really well, even over the acrylic. Buffing it in with our brush. There we are. Gonna fold, find a clean section of paper towel. Buff it in a little bit more. Again, it's still wicking off some of that paint, but that's why we'll do this a couple of times. And now for the edge slicker, you can kind of start at the thinnest one that will fit comfortably onto the leather, and just kind of slick and slide. You can see that burnishes and shapes and shines that edge. This is a burnished edge. It's an unburnished edge. You can really see the kind of difference there. So I start on the smallest setting and go all the way around, and then kind of, you know, move to the next size up. You know, just do a couple of them. Just get it to be as nice and perfect and smooth and sealed as what you can get it. And so I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do a couple more coats of the Aussie wax to seal it, and then I will meet you all right back here. So here you can see I have 16 inches of 3/8 of an inch woven elastic, and we have our completed circlet. With it being your circlet, you could have a leather strap coming around that secures with a buckle. That way it's still adjustable but looks a little bit more period accurate than just some elastic. Or you could have made it where the design's continuous all the way around. That way it's like a completed crown. I prefer this method because I sell these out of my booth and not always made specifically to the size of the client. So it lets me be able to adjust it anywhere from like a child size head to my size head or bigger because I have a giant head. But the way that I've done this, and I'll demonstrate on this side, is I've done 2 little cuts, and I'm using this flat chisel. It's a wood carving tool, Walnut Hollow brand. They're super affordable. Again, all the tools and materials are down in the video description below, and I'm just doing 1 chisel width and then placing it and doing a half of a chisel width. That way it's around half of an inch, because I want this to be snug on our elastic, but not so snug that we can't get any movement, if that makes sense. Again, it's like you just finding that balance, and this is something that has worked for me. And I did a second slit about 1/4 of an inch away. Now what we're going to do is we're going to insert our chisel into one of the slots we've made, and I'm wiggling it one side to the other to open it up a little bit, and then I'm going to thread through our elastic from the back to the front, just like that. Let me zoom in a little bit for you guys. Come down some so you can see how that slid through. And now I'm going to open up this second line, just wiggling and prying it open, and then I'm going to insert this from the front side. I wouldn't recommend doing this on a project like that's a belt or something that's going to be holding things up or bearing a load. Like, I would never tie a bikini top like this, or something like that. But for something like a headdress where you don't want a whole lot of tension, that you can see now that it's threaded through, you really have to, I am pulling and it's not pulling through, but you can come up here and kind of loosen it a bit by pulling on this side, getting in there probably with like a pencil or something to open that up, and then you can pull it down. So it makes it very adjustable for you. And so I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to follow the length of our elastic around. That way you don't want any twists or anything in it. So yeah, just take it and follow it around. And then I'm going to bring it up, and I'm going to feed it through this bottom one. This cut closest to the front center. Just fed through like that. Pulling through. So I've opened it, and I'm just kind of feeding this through. It can be hard, easier said than done. If you're having a hard time with it, just take your chisel, place it in, and open it up just a little bit more. The leather will start to kind of shrink back in on itself, so we'll try to hurry. And feed through, grabbing it. You could use pliers or something if you don't have fingernails. I find my fingernails increasingly resourceful. So there we go, and that's a fully adjustable, super easy to replace elastic. I used to rivet the elastic, but if there's no other rivets in the rest of the design, it can kind of detract from it, and it also makes it a little too permanent. For something like this, where over the years the elastic is going to deteriorate way before the rest of it, and so I want us to be able to replace that to get an even longer costuming life out of the pieces that we've made. Hey y'all, thanks so much for hanging out with me. I hope that this tutorial was helpful to you, and I think it's pretty exciting to be able to take a template and turn it into something that you can wear. So speaking of wearing, let's see how it goes on. So we'll just size it on like this. That's a pretty good size for me. Usually whenever I wear these with my hair down, I'll just take my fingers, bring some of the hair up. That way it covers it in the back, because you don't want to see that elastic. And you could do that if you have a wig or just what have you. Get my bangs out from under it. My mutton chops. So if you can kind of picture this with some elf ears and some war paint and stuff, you could wear it very low down over your brow if that's the look that you're going for. I have a very high forehead, so I often will do things kind of like this and then like draw on like fancy eyebrows or something. You could also, again, if you're inclined, have it farther back. My bangs are all fluffy today. But bring it underneath all of your hair. And this goes for ladies or gentlemen. You can wear this however you like. And then bring it up and wear it kind of as a headband. These are a little bit more tribally styled. But again, just have it be however you like. And I really like this for whenever I have elf ears on, just popping out. So all sorts of different ideas and options. Again, if you would like access to these templates, there's a link to where you can purchase it directly on Etsy for digital download, or you can go and become a patron, and all of our $10 and up patrons get complete access to all of our patterns. We're constantly adding new digital download patterns onto the platform. Right now, at the time of recording, we're using a Facebook group, but if you don't have Facebook, you can send me a message and I will email you the files once a month, usually like on the first of the month. So, but as always, please be patient with me. But if you enjoy our free tutorials and would like to support the creation of more of them, as well as participate in our fairy house giveaways, digital download content, behind the scenes exclusive like stuff. Sometimes it's kind of derpy, but sometimes there's good content there, guys. But most of it's us just being silly and wanting to share that with you. But you do get a lot of behind the scenes pictures and stuff. Please check us out on Patreon. Again, links down in the video description below. And you can share whatever you make or whatever you want us to check out onto our Facebook wall or our Instagram. Again, links are down below. So thank you guys so much for all of your support, encouragement, and inspiration. Y'all are really like pretty cool. Like, you're a talented group of humanoids. Painting with a broad brush. But no, thanks guys. I'm gonna let you go. I'll talk to you later. Happy crafting. Bye.